Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Kama. We're 2/3 of the way down on Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph, toward the end of the line, right halfway through the thick lines where it says my Rebbe, my Rabbanon. And if I have my way, we'll be going all the way to the last line on Nun Beis Amud Beis, which is a lot of ground. It happens to be that most of the Gemaras that we're learning are really very easy. And if we just kind of stay focused, we'll be able to get through successfully with clarity on what's going on. A lot of these Gemaras are just easy to understand and easy to tackle. So let's get started. We had discussed on Shabbos before we closed a unique sugya of how we determine shutfin when the bor is birshus harabim, and we pointed out that maybe perhaps we could understand it a little bit like Rebbe and a little bit like the Rabbanan. So what were those shitas that we were looking at? So the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, my Rebbe, my Rabbanan. The Tanya, we have a brisa. Echad achofer bor tisha, uba acher v'ishlima la'asara. The Tanna Kama says, if I dig 9 and you dig the 10th, you who dug the 10th tefach of the hole, why 10? Because as we've learned about already, a depth of 10 is what can lead to the death of an animal halachically. So therefore, you're chayav. Rebbe, however, says, Rebbe Omer, achar achron lemisa, the last person is chayav as it relates to an animal that dies, but va'achar shneim lenizaken, but an animal that gets hurt applies to both of them. And this really does go back to our previous understanding that we could see how there's shutfus in the digging of a pit in Rishus Harabim. Says the Gemara, my time of Rabbanon. What's the reason for the rabbis that they assume that the person who dug the 10th of the tfachim into the bore, why is it that they're held accountable? Says the Gemara, we know this drush already. We saw it on Shabbos. And the Gemara speaks about this seemingly duplicative language. If by opening up a pit, just uncovering it, you're going to be chayav, why does the Torah later then go on to say about kriya lokolshken all the more so? Ella, what therefore was the purpose of bringing about these two languages? It can't be for that because that's obvious. It can't be that psicha and kriya are the same pasha. So therefore, says the Gemara explaining the sheet of the Rabbanon as to why the latter person is held accountable. Kura achar kura, that when there's a digging after a digging, the second person who does the digging undoes in effect, or shasilik, he removes whatever was done by the first person, at least halachically speaking. Of course, the first 9 tvachim of dirt are missing. Pasha, we understand. But halachically speaking, that second person is held accountable because he was masalik ma'aserisha. I have a Rebbe. Okay. Well, if the Rabbanan have a pasuk to prove their shita that we're Mesalek Ma'aser Rishon and the second person is held accountable, so then how does Rebbe, who holds that they could in theory both be accountable for Nizakin, how does he understand the pasuk? Amar Lach, 12 lines from the bottom, 10 lines from the bottom, Hanu Mitzrach Tzrichi. Rabbanan Amar Lach, Hanu Mitzrach Tzrichi. He doesn't make this drasha because Kede Amrinan, like we saw in Shabbos, he has a limud that he uses for both of these words. So then says the Gemara, well, the rabbis on the previous blot agreed. They didn't seem to have a dissenting opinion in regards to how to learn the words ki yiftach and chayichre. Ella, we have to therefore pivot and try another approach as to how we know the Rabbanan say that the latter person is chayav. Again, let's repeat our case. The case was where Ruvain dug 9 tefachim and Shimon dug the 10th tefach, and then an animal falls in and dies. So the Gemara says that the latter person, according to the Rabbanon, is chayiv. So what's the reason for the rabbi's shita? 10 lines from the bottom. Ela hainu taima de Rabbanon. The reason for the shita of the Rabbanon is Amar Kra ki yichre ishbor. Same pasuk, but let's darshan it differently. Ki yichre ishbor. The Gemara says ki yichre ishbor echad velo shnayim. It's ish in the singular. Oh, so therefore it has to be only one person who brings about the conclusion that that bor is now deadly. And who was the person who brought it to the level of deadly? It was the second person. And there, you can't have two people who are both held accountable. It's not possible. I have a Rebbe. Okay, very good. If the Rabbanan learned the pasuk to say that the word ish is written in the singular to teach us that only one person and only the latter person can be considered to be the one who is bringing this pit to the point of being fatal. So then how does Rebbe learn those psukim of ish? The Rebbe, Ahumi Boile, this pasuk is used for something else. Ki yikra ish bor, velo shor bor. Oh, he learns that only if a pit is dug by an ish, but not by a shor. We know sometimes that dogs, when they take their paws after they go to the bathroom, they dig up some dirt. So what if a shor is just playing around in dirt and he digs a bore, and this is a very talented shor, and he digs a 10 tefach bore. Very impressive. Even at the bottom, nice walls. So
fall in.
What?
He doesn't fall in.
He probably didn't fall in. Yeah, this whole case is a little weird, but the Gemara does have a drasha that if I own an animal, if I dig the pit, then the pit is a halachic pit where it can cause for fatalities and I'd be held responsible. But if a shor does dig that pit, then there is no responsibility for me as the owner of the pit. And if that's true, then Rebbe gets out of his issue of trying to understand the psukim of the Rabbanon. The drasha of ish in the singular is used by the Rabbanon, but the pasuk is used to teach us about shor, that a shor who digs a pit is not going to be considered the responsibility of the Baal. I have a Rabbanon. Where do the rabbis learn that din from? That if a shor were to dig a pit, that the owner would not be held accountable. So to this, the Gemara says, Trey ish bor ksivi. It says the word ish bor twice in the psukim. So therefore, the Rabbanan have two limudim. One is that ish is singular, and therefore only one person can be held accountable for the digging of a pit, and it must therefore be the person who brings it to the depth of 10 tvachim. And the second ish bor teaches us ish bor velo shor bor, that an animal that digs is not going to be a financial burden on its owner if in fact a shor were to dig a hole. The Rebbe, okay, right? The Rabbanan keep proving themselves pretty well. Now Rebbe is stuck because according to the way that the Rabbanan learned the psukim and the fact that they were able to learn out both drashos means that Rebbe should also be able to learn out both drashos. The Rebbe, 7 lines from the bottom, no. I did the chasav hai, kasav hai. Because it said ishbor in one case, it says ishbor in another case, but lav dafka. The second drasha of ishbor is not meant to be for a limud. So says the Gemara, and that's how Rebbe wriggles out. What that does is it leaves us with the two shitas that we were starting with. It leaves us with the shita of Rebbe, who says that there is culpability for multiple people. And it leaves us with the shita of the Rabbanon, that the only person who's going to be held accountable is the person who actually brings the bore to a depth of 10. Says the Gemara, Basra, who says, the Gemara asks, that when we have two people who partner, and Ruvain digs the first 9 of the pit, and Shimon digs the last 1 of the pit to bring it to 10, mehechat hesi, that it should be the second person. How did we totally remove the first guy from all of the work that he did? I'm going to give you a horrible svara, but he did rove. He did a lot of it. He did 90% of it. Why do we totally ignore what person number 1 did? Says the Gemara, Basra, Dilma Kama. Perhaps we should say that we're being Mechayev Ruvain, who dug the first 9, and Shimon, all he did, I removed a couple of shovels of dirt, but that was it. The Gemara says, Lo salka daitach. You can't have this havamina. Why? Because the Amar Kra v'amesi hielo. The pasuk says v'amesi hielo to ka'avid misa, the one who brings about misa. That would therefore be the second person. Because if we look at the sequence of events, when Ruvain dug the first 9, and then the animal dies, that's not misa. Even if the animal dies, you're pater. That's not a normal depth where misa occurs. The only time that misa can ever be incurred is after Shimon, the second digger, is the one who got us to 10 tvachim, and therefore we have to assume that way. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, we have a problem. This pasuk of Rava. What does Rava teach us? To Amar Rava, shor psule hamukdashin. If you have an animal that was initially meant to be for the Beis HaMikdash, and then it became psule hamukdashin, it became invalidated and could no longer be used for the Beis HaMikdash. Shenafa lebor, the halacha is pater. Shenemar v'ameis yelo. So b'mi she'ameis shelo. So says the Gemara, we learn the din v'ameis yelo excludes a case of psule mukdashin from chiyuv if it falls into my pit that I dug. So therefore, the pasuk of v'ameis yelo cannot be used to teach that it's always Shimon who's chayiv. So the Gemara is back to its question and says the Gemara, seemingly a very basic svara, but one that actually overrides a drasha amre. Says the Gemara, "V'lav memela shamas mina debe'ahuda avad misa askinan." It's obvious, says the Gemara, who should be responsible. The guy who brought the pit to 10 should be the one who's responsible. Because if he didn't do anything, there would be no animals that die. And even if they died in a fluke scenario, we don't halachically hold anyone financially responsible for an animal that dies at 9 tvachim. Nezikin, yes. Misa, no. So the Gemara says, it's a balabatish svara. I don't need the pasuk of V'amesi Yelo to teach me that the second guy digging is going to be held accountable. If there was no second guy, we wouldn't be in this case scenario to start with. I'm still a little, I mean, this is the answer of the Gemara. It is the answer of the Gemara. I'm a little bothered. First guy has zero responsibility. I mean, I understand halachically why he only did 9. He only should be, huh?
When it comes to Misa.
He did nothing.
Nothing.
You're saying he did nothing. He did halachically nothing. Yeah, but the problem is that you what?
No foul.
Yeah, but for Nezikin, it still counts.
Nezikin it still counts 100%. Not only that, but when you look at the Maisa of Shimon, all Shimon did was dig 1 tefach, and now he's held accountable for all Misas of shiur that they. I know the answer in my head. There's like a part of me that doesn't like it.
Kind of what Yitzchak was alluding to. It seems like Misa and Nizakin are completely separated. It's not like Nizakin is like half Misa.
No.
And therefore, since he's
No, 100% separated. Yeah. That's crazy.
9, even though it has that heel.
I think I have that fairness bug in my head of like things need to be more equitable in regards to consequences, and I'm just wrong. It's not the first time. Certainly not the first time. Certainly not the last. Let's continue. 3 lines from the bottom. Yeah, you should not. This conversation is going to happen for a long time. I would say it's going to happen. It's going to happen until we're wise and white haired. But I shaved today, and I watched all of the white hair fall off my face, so I'm old enough. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. Here we're going to see a stira in Brisas. Echad hachofer borasara. Let's say there was a man who dug a pit of 10, already to the level of culpability for Misa. Another guy deep into the hole to 20. There should not be much of an afkamina. You're already there. Check this out. Kulan chayavin.
Why?
Okay. It's a great question. What?
For full? So the guy can make a profit?
Or they divide the profit. They divide the death cost by 3. That's, I don't know. I didn't look into this piece. But here's the stira. Uriminhu. Here's a brisa which seems to not say that everyone's chayiv. Echad hachofer borasara. You got one guy who digs a pit of 10. Uba acher v'sayed v'chayed. And the second guy came in and a sid, we know is limestone. He took some lime paste of some kind and he put some on the lining. So let's just imagine he dug a cylinder of a hole. Let's say it was a circle of 3 feet wide and it was 10 tvachim deep. And this second, after it was dug, the second guy goes in, he lines it with sid, and the second thing is kayed. He draws a little bit. I wonder if this is where the word CAD came from architectural drawings. Who knows? That's totally not true. No, I know it's an acronym. Come on, it was like a little Yiddish humor. That was my nittel nach for the night. I'm done now. That was my bittul Torah. Check in a box. So the Gemara says that, look at this, ha'acharon chayev. This is very weird. Because first of all, the previous brisa said that it got to 10, and then the next person, both of them were chayiv. Here, the first guy brought it to 10, and he's pater. The second guy who lined it with sid, he's chayiv. This doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. And it brings us to the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Lema haRebbi and haRabbanon. Perhaps we should say that this mirrors the machlokas that we saw earlier of the Rabbanon and Rebbe, that the Rabbanon always said it's on the second person, which is why the latter brisa that we just saw with the person who put in the seed, that he would be chayiv and the first guy would be pater. Mashein came the first brisa where everyone's held accountable. So that is already another shita that we saw in the Tanai. It says the Gemara, Amar Ozvid, no, I disagree. Hava ha-Rabbanon, really everyone, both of these brises are the Rabbanon. Ad kan lo ka'amri Rabbanon, achron chayiv, elahecha de lo avad kama shiur misa. When is it that the Rabbanon will say that the last one is chayiv? That's when the first person, the lo avad kama shiur misa, where the first person didn't bring it to a shiur misa. Avalecha de avad kama shiur misa, when the first person did bring it to a shiur of misa, afilu Rabbanon modu de kulan chayav, and even the rabbis would agree that that everyone's chayiv. Says the Gemara, that's beautiful, but that's not our case. Says the Gemara, v'hasayid v'kayid avad kama shir misa v'katani achron chayiv. You just tried to give me this fudged answer that the Rabbanan would all agree in a case. That wasn't what happened. The case we were dealing with, where the acharon was chayiv, was where the person put lime on the wall after someone already dug a ditch of 10. So that's not our case. Amre, the Gemara says 8 lines down, 7 lines down, nun aleph amud beis. Amre hasam shelo haya bo hevel lemisa. At that point, there really wasn't a hevel lemisa, which we spoke about on Shabbos, which was the unique shita of Rav, that there's some type of air that causes for death, that leads to death, and when it was dug that way, there wasn't enough. Uva acher v'hosif ba hevel lemisa, and there really was an addition which brought about misa, and that's why the case is different. The guy who, this is a bit of a svara in the Rishonim. I'm not saying I have good pshat in this. I'm just telling you what I read. But what's difficult with this Gemara is that it seems to say that the guy who lined the pit with Sid, he enhanced the hevel. He made it more of a powerful hevel. Who cares? 10 is 10 is 10. That's what the Gemara says, and maybe that's why there's an Ika de Amre, because it's a very difficult answer. And says the Gemara, Ika de Amre, that Amar Rav Zvid ha Rebbe. Really, maybe both of the braysos at the bottom of the page are the shita of Rebbe, and hach de katani kulan chayavin shiur. We could understand, according to Rebbe, who already held in the braysos at the bottom of the page, that the person who dug us to 10 and then to 20 and then to 30, all of them were chayav. And then here the katani kulan chayavin shapir. That makes perfect sense. But had the katani achron chayav, in the case of the painting of the Sid who says that he's chayav, kigon shelo hayabo havel lo lemisa velo lenizaken. Similar answer as before, that when the guy dug 10, there wasn't any hevel for killing animals, and there was no hevel for damaging animals. Again, very dachuk. It's very difficult to understand these gemaras.
The whole Amud is that I don't know if Amud days before said that 10 defines either for Tekala or for Hevel. Bangkok or Bangkok, 10 is the defining minimum.
It's true, but one of the things we also discussed is that there is a point of dissipation potentially. We spoke about, if you have the Grand Canyon, it's not a makom hevel, right? But we said that more confined spaces are. So I'm giving a balabatish answer to your question. It could be that this pit is just big enough that it needs to be minimized a little in order to have hevel. It's a balabatish svar. We'll see things like that on the bottom of the page actually, but this requires more research. As I said openly, this is not a simple piece of Gemara. It is to understand again in Shakla V'Tarya, but the actual pshat in this is not so simple. Okay, so that answers up, or whatever, potentially answers up a little bit of that. We're about a fifth of the way down, 12 lines down. Nun aleph amud beis. Let's continue. Amar Rava, hiniach even al pi habor v'hishlima le'asara bana le'machlokes Rabbi v'Rabbanan. This case requires talking out. There's a pit that's 9. And I take rocks and I build the 10th tefach above ground. Okay, so let's just assume that my hand is earth level, and this is what's happening. 9 of the tefachim are below the ground. Above my fingers, I build a ring that's a tefach to therefore make the depth of the whole of tefach, even though dug into earth is only 9. Like a well, dug into earth is only 9, but above ground is the extra tefach that gives us the depth that can lead to the death of an animal. So the Gemara says this is the machlokes of Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Namely, if there are 2 people involved, one person dug 9, the next person dug 10, Rebbe would say everyone's chayiv. The Rabbanan would say only the achron is chayiv. Only the guy who added the lip at the end is chayiv. So asks the Gemara pshita. No. Okay, what's the difference if you dig a 10th at the bottom or add 1 at the top to make it 10? Who cares? 10 is 10. What's the difference? Says the Gemara, that's not true. Ma'udetema lemata hu dehevla didei kakatile aval lemala delo hevla didei kakatil emalo kamash malon. I might have thought that when we are digging, the hevel is because you dug 10. It's not just that there's a space of 10. It's that you dug into the ground 10. Kamash malan, that distinction is irrelevant. And in fact, the machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanon still does apply here. Boy Rava asks a question, again, similar questions. Similar questions. Tam tefach, if there is a tefach that is filled in, or visile kavanav, meaning if something that was 10 was either filled into 9, or if it was 9 plus the lip and the lip was removed, and then somebody else made it to 10. This is not mashma in the words of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Mahu, mi'amrinan mai de avad shakle, odilma nistalku ma'isa rishon, the kamale kule birshuse. Take we don't know what the halachic implications are. Namely, do we consider this sequential actions of person 1 and person 2? Or do we view these now as completely different diggings, as it were? And that we don't know the answer to. More cases, and this is also a chiddush. We're about a third of the way down, a little bit more on Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Amar Rabba bar Bar Chana, Amar Shmuel bar Marta, or Shmona mehen shnei tvachim. There's a pit that's only 8 deep, which is not deep enough for murder. Says the Gemara, that's not true. In fact, it is, because 2 of those tefach is water. So shnei tvachim maya chayiv. My time, why are you chayiv? So the Gemara, without any deep explanation at all, just makes a statement. Kol tefach the maya could trade the abasha dami. I don't know what that means. I mean, I know what the words mean. I kind of know what the words mean. That says that that there is going to be this extra power with water. Rashi over here in his mystical ways and managing to add in so much. Maya, 2/3 of the way down, Mosif Hevla. The power of being Mosif Hevel with water is greater than the power of being Mosif Hevel with dry land, which makes me think of vapor. It makes me think of steam. It makes me think of moisture in the air. Again, I'm thinking a little sciencey. They didn't have they probably knew what humidity was. Of course, they had bathhouses. They know how to. But this Gemara does not bother to explain anything else. This would be a great time to sit with Rishonim for a while and say, what in the world is the Gemara talking about? Thank you. What is Hevel?
Just start.
What is Hevel? What did Rav mean yesterday in Daf Yomi when he said that they were talking about Hevel and not Chavata? I understood Rav's svara, that the Chavata, the karka, is not yours. I understand. But the Hevel, what is it? Is it space? Is it a smell? Is it a toxin? Chemicals? So here the Gemara has a little bit of a hint based on Rashi that it is Mosif Hevla. Fine. So that's what the Rashi says, that if it's 8 and of the 8, 2 of them are water, that is considered murder territory. And you would be held accountable if a shore fell in and died. Ibayalahu, let's ask a couple of different iterations of numbers. We just spoke about 8, of which 2 were water. What if it was Ibayalahu bor tisha umehen tefach? It was 9 deep and 1 was water. Mehen tefach echad mayim. Mahu, miamrinan kevan delo nefishe maya. It's not the same amount of water in the initial case where it was 2, or that was considered maya mosif, as Rashi put it. Therefore, less behevla. Odilma kevan de amik tve, because the abasha is deeper, because there's more depth of earth. Is behevla. We don't know the answer to that. What about bor shivo mehen shlosha tvachim mayim? Mahu, same question. 7 deep, of which 4 are water. We would assume, based on the Gemara's question and based on Rashi, that when there's 3 tfachim of water, that there's even more hevel, and therefore whatever the impact of the water is, how do the ratios of airspace to water volume, how do they impact each other? Miamrinan, kevan den fishe maya tvei ispe hevla, that there's more hevel because there's more water. Odilma kevan delo amka, because the depth is not the same as 8, less be hevla teku. We have absolutely no idea. Not only do we have no idea what the answer is, we don't even know what the question is. So we're in completely common straits here, because we don't even know what the real vapor is like. We don't even understand Hevel and its basic idea. It's hard to say that it's just a space, because this throws everything for a wrench. I could have argued up until now that it was just space. But here I can't say that it's just space anymore, because I would not have assumed that water with a depth of less than 10 would have been a scenario of Misa for a shore. And I'm not talking about drowning. It doesn't mean the animal's not drowning. That's pashut from the Gemara, or at least I assume it's pashut. Okay. Next question. Ba mine Rav Shezvi me Rabba. Rav Shezvi asks Rabba, Hirchiva mahu. Let's say there was a pit and I widened the opening. When I initially dug it, it was a cylinder 3 feet wide, 10 tefachim deep. Then I take a shovel and I make that 3 tefach opening into 4 tefachim wide. I have 3 feet wide. I made it 4 feet wide. Easier to fall in. That's basically what's going on. So says the Gemara, Mahu, Amarle, Hare Mietevla. On the one hand, when you widen the top, you minimize the hevel, you minimize these damaging vapors, whatever they are, because there's more room for them to escape. Amarle Adarabba, it's true that you minimize hevel, and therefore when you say minimize hevel, you mean maybe you should not be chayiv if the animal dies. Says Gemara Amarle Adarabba, Hare Kirev Hezeka. You made it more likely by increasing the area of the opening, you made it more likely for an animal to fall in. So which one is it? Is the widening of a hole of a bore, is that the kind of thing which makes you more likely to be patur if an animal dies because now the hevel can escape faster, or more likely to be chayiv because you widened the surface area in which the animal can fall in? We should take a look. If the animal died because of hevel, hare mi'e tevla. If the animal died because of hevel, so then really what ended up happening? You should be patur because it's not normal. Mi'e tevla, all the hevel escaped already. And if the animal died not because of that at all, but it just fell in and it died like that, hare kirev hezeka, there it seems to be you should be chayav because it was a bit of a bigger hole. So that's one approach. And Ika de Amre, last of the short lines on Nun Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara continues with another possibility of Rav Ashi's explanation. Let's see which side of the hole they fell in on. Here, the Gemara assumes that you only widened the hole on one side. If it fell into the side that you widened it, maybe you squared it out when it was round, or whatever the case may be, and then the animal's leg got stuck and he fell in. So then you should be chai because you made the hole bigger. You made it more likely for the animal to die. Maybe if it entered on the other side, you should be pater because the hevel is more likely to escape, and therefore lemaisa, it's not really why it died. It's not a real hevel hole. It's not really not. Again, these Gemaras are very difficult to paint without Rishonim, and there are plenty of discussions to have here. We're about 3/4 of the way down the second in the wide lines. Let's get into some more discussions. Itmar, bor she'omka kirachava. A bore that is as deep as it is wide. So we're just going to use for math purposes. It's 10 tvachim deep, because otherwise there's no misa, and 10 tvachim wide. That is a hole that is 40 inches by 40 inches by 40 inches. What is that? That's 3.5 feet. That's not so big. But it's big enough to kill an animal, apparently. Now that I put it in those terms.
Not very deep at all.
Not very deep at all, 10 tvachim. Huh?
Honestly, Phil?
Huh? It's nothing.
Not very deep at all.
Yeah. Cow's gonna, what? Couldn't kill it.
It couldn't kill a cow.
But the Gemara says that if a cow in fact dies in this 10 tefach hole, you're obligated to pay for that whole cow if you're the owner. But if they go head first, it could be a baby calf. There's ways to get the cow to fall in. A full-size cow is not falling into a hole, but remember that it's a minimal depth. It's not a maximal depth. So when you say it's 10 tefach deep, it means at least 10 tefach deep. It could be 20 feet deep. It could be very, very, very big. As long as there's hevel, whatever hevel is, right? All right, I'm showing what I don't know in today's shiur so broadly because I have no clue what hevel is. All right, let's go. The Gemara says itmar. So borsha omka kirachava. Let's assume the minimal approach of 10 tefach by 10 tefach cubed. So Rabbi Rav Yosef Damar Tavar Mishmei de Rabbi Bar Bar Chana Damar Mishmei de Rebbe, the Rebbe Mani. Chad Amar Leolam Yesh Bahevel Ad Sheyehe Rechava Yeser Al Omka. When does the hevel stay in its place? Up until the point that the rechava, that the width is greater than the depth. So once the right to left is greater than the top to bottom, so then it's all gone. When they're exactly the same, hevel exists. When it's in cube form, when the cutout is cube, so then hevel stays. But if there's a widening right to left, across, on the horizontal plane, not on the vertical plane. On the horizontal plane, if it gets wider, the hevel dissipates. No, that's not correct. He says there will be no hevel until the omek is greater than the rechava, where the depth is greater, where the vertical depth is greater than the horizontal spread. But literally at the 50-yard line, there is no hevel. So there's a machlokas between these amoraim. If there is hevel in a place where the omek and the rochav are exactly the same.
Is the horizontal both directions?
Not necessarily,
Or is
because
it
we had a case of
narrow?
an aqueduct the other day. Yesterday, we spoke about, remember yesterday, the weird case where it was 6 deep?
Yeah.
And we said that 6 plus the 4 between the ground and the belly equal 10. So that's the case we're doing. So it seems to not be the case. I'm using the example of cubed because it's like a petri dish example, but I would imagine that it's only twice, really. It's probably just depth in one direction of width. Okay. We had spoken about a case in the Mishnah of Avar Lo Barishon V'lo Chisahu, that if the first person walks by the pit and doesn't cover it. So let's say Barishon Me'emas Miftar, at what point does the first person become pater? So Rabba v'Rav Yosef de Amre Tarvayu Mishmei de Rabba Bar Bar Chana de Amr Mishmei de Ramani Chad Amr Mishemanicho Mishtamesh v'Chad Amr Yimsor Lo Dalyo. So this seems to be a machlokas amoraim. One says when he stops doing what he's doing with the pit, he walks away. The other person says when person number one hands a lid to person number two, and this is kitanoi. This seemingly aligns with a machlokas in the tanoim. The Gemara says, "Amad l'mayim min habor." If a person's drawing up water from a pit, u'bachaver v'amar lo hanach li v'ani ad lemayim, leave it for me, namely, don't cover it, and I'm going to continue drawing up water. Kevan shehinichol mishtamesh pater. The Tanakama holds that the second that person number one stops drawing water, even though he doesn't cover it anymore, he doesn't need to cover it because he's communicated with person number two that person number two wants to communicate drawing up the water. So the Tana says sufficient. That would be similar to one of the shitas that we just saw. Again, we don't know if it's Rabbi Rav Yosef, but one of the shitas was when he stops being involved in his asek in whatever he's dealing with. Masha'en Ken Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Mishiyim Sir Lo Dalyo, that he says no, you have the person number one has to cover it. It's like a strict protocol, It's like when you're transferring from person to person. Person number one must first cover the well and then walk away, and then that's a strict measure. Nobody falls in, whatever. So that seems to be the machlokas. B'makim iflagei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Savar. All right, here we go. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Savar yesh brera. Hi mididei kamamale v'hai mididei kamamale. Each person is filling up their own water. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that there is this way to create brera, where the water that I draw from the well is retroactively conceptually mine, and where the water that you draw from the well is retroactively conceptually yours. However, V'Rabbanon Sabre, the rabbis were of the opinion that ein brera. So that could be one way to understand this machlokas. And Amar Avina va'azdu l'ta'amayu. This is not the first time we've seen this idea before between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Ditznan. Hashutfin shenadro hana zemizeh asur likonis l'chatzer. If you have two partners, let's say you and I own a field together, and we get into a big fight, and we're madir hana that you and I cannot benefit from our own fields because I own every granule and you own every granule of the field. So you and I, neither of us can go in. It's also for me to go into your property, and since it's co-shared, co-owned, we can't go in together. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer zenich nas l'soch shelo, zenich nas l'soch shelo. So here we see the same exact thing. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov seemingly holds of brera, that when you are putting your foot on the ground, retroactively speaking, that piece of ground is yours. What would happen if you put your foot on every piece of ground? Okay, there's what to discuss there. That's fine. So, but my kimifli, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov sorry yesh brera, haila denafshe, Rabbanon sorry ein brera. Amar Rabbi Elazar, hamocher bor. This part's going to be faster. Hamocher bor lechavero. The man sells a pit to his friend. Kevan shemasar lo dalyo kana. Once I hand you the cover, then the transaction is done, and now I have successfully sold the pit to you. Hechidami, says the Gemara. What was the actual transaction? Ibe kaspa, if our transaction was financial, likni bekaspa, let the money be the tool of transaction. What's with the lid? And ibe chazaka, if there's a chazaka, likni bechazaka. What's with this weird thing with the lid? It's not normal. So it says the Gemara, Lolam bechazaka. Really, we are talking about a case of chazaka. And when we are dealing with chazaka, really one person should say to the other, Lech chazek ukni. You need to go make a chazaka and be koneh. But says the Gemara, there is this emblematic action. V'kevan shemasar lo dolyo. Once I give you the cover, that is the same thing as command de omar lech chazek ukni dami. So the Gemara is saying that there's a Maisa that supplants the need for the verbal declaration. The verbal declaration should be Lecha Zekukni, but when I give you the cover, it's the same exact thing. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, very similarly, Hamocher Bais Lechaber. If I'm selling you a house, Kevan Shemasar Lo Mafteach Kana. We know the picture when you sell a house, there's always a picture of somebody handing over the keys to another person. The Gemara says that's the moment of transaction. Here too, top of Nun Beis Malaf, the Gemara says Echidami. If it's cash, give them the money. And if it's with a chazaka, then it should be with a chazaka. But what is with the handing over of the keys? That's a weird behavior. That's not a Yiddish thing. It's not a halachic thing to give over keys. That's not, keys are keys literally just open a door. They have no merit to them. So the Gemara says, because really, la'olam b'chazaka, same as before, really it should just be with chazaka. And it should be that when we make a transaction of a house, that one person says to the other, the seller says to the buyer, you should go and make a chazaka. But this emblematic behavior, I'm going to make sure that I give you the key. That's commando amar lechazeku kni dami, and that is sufficient for such a transaction. The Gemara continues with a similar. What?
Why not be a at that point?
The Gemara does not say that. The Gemara is saying that it's in place of the lechazeku kni. It is a chiddush, and I don't know why it doesn't say that. Many of our transactions are like that. You know, by a chuppah v'kiddushin.
It seems like it's taken the place of a procedural event, not an actual chazaka.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not.
This is also where we would jump off the page and say it's time for Rishonim because
Exchange with Khalifa and things like that.
yeah, there's a lot to discuss here. There's a lot to discuss here. This is the hardest part for me with Daf Yomi because I want to spend a week on this, but it's not the way things are.
House, I think, is you go out and you do something.
You do a maisa.
Moves
You
that
do a
here
maisa.
is
Yeah.
right.
You hit a nail into the fence, something like that, which is not a big deal because when you buy a new house, it's usually chaos. So it's usually easy to fix one thing. So anyways, that's what the Gemara says with a couple of examples. Here's a third one. Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yanai. This one's not so practical for our times. Hamocher Eider lechavero. If I sell you a flock of animals, kevan shemasar lo mashchuchis. We're going to define what a mashchuchis is, but for the moment, it's that thing that controls the flock. So then, Kana, ask the Gemara same question as before. Echidami. If the way that you're kona these animals is with Mashicha, then go do a Kenyan Mashicha like every other Kenyan Mashicha. And Ibn Masira, if it's not, if it's someone literally picking up and handing you something, then likni b'masira. The Gemara answers, la'olam b'mashicha. Really, the Kenyan is b'mashicha. But uvay l'meimar le'lech m'shochu kni. Really, the seller should tell the owner, the seller should tell the buyer, excuse me, you should do a Kenyan Mashicha. But v'keban de masr mashchuchis kemando amar le'lech m'shochu kni dami. This is considered a valid form of Kenyan, where I give you something that represents what I need you to do, which is lech chazeku kni, or in this case, lech m'shochu kni. Says the Gemara, my mashchuchis. What is, in regards to this Eider, what is this thing that controls the group? Says the Gemara, hacha, here in Bavel, tirgmu karkashta, some type of noise maker, some type of sound maker that would make a sound. Rashi says 8 lines down, 7 lines down, karkashta, garsinon, zug, she mekarkesh ba. It's like a bell where there's something on the inside. It's Pavlov's, not puppies, but goats, and they all listen to the same sound. The second they hear the sound, everybody flocks. Rav Yaakov Amar that a karkashta is actually not a bell, but it's Iza, the Azla Beresh Edra. It is actually an influencer goat. It is the one goat that every other goat follows. Says the Gemara, that was a horrible, horrible joke. Horrible joke. Says the Gemara, no, you didn't. And don't worry, it wasn't. But I still love you. Kididarash Hahu Galila. There was a man from the Galil who said, Aleder of Chiza, Kad Ragiz Raya, when the shepherd, capital S, when the shepherd gets upset, Al Ana, Avid Lenagda Samuta, it makes the leader blind. And what the Gemara is saying is derech mashal, that when a Kadosh Baruch Hu, unfortunately, and this happens in our history, it might be happening now, we don't know because we can't pull back the veil. But when we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing, a Kadosh Baruch Hu blinds our leadership and they make horrible decisions. And then we are the ones who have to follow the blind sheep because that's what he's supposed to do. And we live in a culture that we don't control all of the facets of our life. So be it. That brings us to a new Mishnah, a third of the way down. Still have a lot of ground to cover. Let's get moving. Let's say person number 1 had a pit. He did his responsibility and covered it. When the second person showed up, he found it, megula. He found it open. And that second guy did not cover it. The second guy would be chayiv. He saw an open pit, he should have covered it. Next case in the Mishnah, kiso karoi v'nafal asocho shor o chamor umeis pater, that if it was covered properly, okay, if it was covered properly, and afal pikein, an animal fell in, the Gemara is going to ask, how is that possible? So then umeis pater, then you're going to not be held accountable. You did your job. Lo chiso karoi, if you did a terrible job of covering it, the nafal asocho shor o chamor umeis chayv. ABCs. This already is pretty pashut. Next case. Nafal of mikol hakriya, if an animal falls forward into the pit because he heard the digging, his curiosity got the best of him, chayiv. The sound that you made drew the animal in, and you're chayiv. Le'acharav, if an animal falls in backwards, mikol hakriya, pater. That's what the Mishnah says. Nafal asocho shor v'kela, if a shor falls in and its utensils fall in, v'nishtabru, and those kalim broke, or chamor, a chamor falls in, the kelav and its kalim v'niskaru, and its clothes tear when it falls in, chayav ala behimu pater ala kalim. We saw this earlier in the Masechta, very early in the Masechta. No, it says kafches. I thought it was much earlier. That you're going to be chayav on the behemoth and pater on the kalim. We've spoken about this idea many times, that when there is a bor, according to most, you are not chayiv on kalim that fall into a bor, only on animals. Last case of the Mishnah, nafal asocho shor cheresh shot of a katan. Here we're not talking about the owners. We're talking about the animal itself that is a cheresh or a shota or a katan. What's a katan? Okay.
Yeah, what's a shota?
What's a katan?
Baby.
What's the difference between a katan and a gadol?
Baby.
Who cares that it's a katan or a gadol?
The question is, what's the age?
Why would there be a difference
What's the
between?
age? We have mitzvahs at a certain age.
Exactly.
What is the age?
So that you're asking my question. The shota I could understand. There's a psychotic animal. Yeah. Shas is a funny thing, It's unbelievable. So says the Gemara, so these animals that are either themselves a shor, a cher, shot, a katan, then if they fill in, you're going to be chayiv. However, the Mishnah concludes that ben o bas eved, if you have a male or female eved that are children, o ama, ben o bas eved o ama, strange language. No.
This is referring still to the animal?
No. No, now we're talking about children who are avadim. No. So to that, the Gemara says you're pater on those deaths that occur, which is a very funny contrast that there are people that you would not be chayav on, but there are animals that you are. The Gemara opens, V'reisha ad emas miftar. When does the first person become pater? Amara b'chdei sheyeda. Meaning, when we find out that the pit is in fact uncovered. So how long does the first guy remain chayav for? What if he knows about it? If the first guy knows about it and it's his pit, he's got to get in the car, middle of the night, doesn't matter. He's got to go take achrayis. He's got to be a bal achrayis. The Gemara says, "Bichdei sheyeda," as long as there's enough time for him to, in theory, have found out, which back in the day could have been weeks, and today it takes one text message. So there are major halachic differences because it's only the amount of time it takes for the knowledge to travel. It's not fixing it. So there, Rav says that's how long it takes for the first person to no longer be pater. Because if I text that guy and say, "Hey, your pit is open," and he says, "I'm going back to bed," and somebody gets hurt, he's chayav. Not just that he should know, but that others should tell him. Rav Yochanan Amar v'yiskor po'alim v'yichros arbazim v'chasenu. You gotta be l'maisa. He's got to have time to go to Lowe's and build the cover. You can't just tell him. He's not a miracle worker. It's got to be more practical. Says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down at the 2 dots, 4 lines into the new Gemara. Asks the Gemara the most obvious question. If you covered it properly, if you put up the right covering, no animal should be falling in. So it says the Gemara, Amar Yitzchak, Bar Bar Chana, Shehitliya mitocho. You didn't know this, but there was some type of algae, some type of mold, some type of worms that were worming through the wood, and the wood lost its integrity. And while normally it should be that the wood can hold up the weight of a shore, normally that's true, but not here. Here the wood was rotted and you had no idea. So in such a case, the din would be that you are pater. Ibayalu. This is going to take up the rest of the day, and most of this is pretty fast. Most of this really is pretty fast, and we do have to get to the bottom, otherwise we're just kicking the can down the road, so we're going to push. Let's say you have a covering that's good enough for shvarim to hold a cow, but I guess camels weigh more, but it's not able let's say the threshold is 1,000 pounds and a camel's 1,500 pounds. So the cover you have is good for the 1,000 pound cow, but not good for the camels. V'asu gemalim, and then camels takadu walk by v'ir uha, and they weaken the cover. V'asu shvarim v'nafli bay. And the cover that you put on that was good enough for shvarim but not for camels was weakened by camels, and then a shore falls in and died. What should be the din? So Amri, the Gemara responds, Hey Chidami, what was the case? You're an irresponsible person if you live in the desert in Arabia and there's camels everywhere. You should have known. You should have known that camels walk everywhere. You should have put on a better cover. And one way or the other, the case doesn't make any sense. How can you have a case scenario like that? Either there are camels or there aren't. 7 lines from the bottom to Asul Lifrakim, that there are camels, but they're only there sparingly. Do we say Kevan to Asul Lifrakim Posheahu, that because camels show up sometimes, so therefore you really are held accountable. That right now there aren't any camels, so therefore you're completely potter. Which one is it? Do we say that the sparing occurrence of camels being there, of heavier animals being there, should that be on you or should that not be? Here's answer number 1 in the Brisa. Toshma, 3 lines from the bottom. That was a line that we saw in our Mishnah. We had said that if you cover it properly, and then an animal still falls in, and the animal dies, you're potter. So let's figure out how we get from here to the answer to our question. Hey Chidami, if the cover was a 2,000 pound threshold and even a camel could stand on it, hey Chinafel, no one should fall in. Obviously, that's not the case. It can't be that was the cover, because if that was the cover, then how did an animal ever fall in? Elalav, it must be karoi l'shvarim, turning to the top of nun beis and beis. Below karoi l'gmalim, it must be that we're talking about a case where the animal, where the cover of the boar was only fit for shvarim, but not for gmalim. If there were camels there, amai pater posheahu. If you say that there were camels there, then you're a fool. You did a terrible job as a boss. You should have taken care of that pit better and put on a stronger door. So what was the case of in our Mishnah? It must be it must be the case that there are camels sometimes, and in fact, in this case, the camels showed up, they weakened the cover of the pit, and then a shore fell in. Alma, what do we see that the fact that it still says that you're putter in our Mishnah, since over here we see that there are no camels, so you're an anus. If when you're building it, there are no camels there, you don't have to prepare for every eventual circumstance. You prepared for a reasonable number of cases, you're done. Shalom Am Yisrael. So therefore, maybe we have an answer to our case. Our question was, are you going to be putter if the cover of the pit is good enough for shvarim, but not good enough for gemalim? The answer seems to be, Amre, it seems to be that you're putter. The Gemara says you're incorrect. Amre, that's not true. Last of the short lines, which is sad because we're on the 5th line of the page. Amre, lo, that's not true. Really, the cover of the pit can hold thousands of pounds, even a camel. How could we answer up this brisa? It's impossible to fall in. Yes, you put in the right wood cover. It's the right kind of wood. You did a good job. There's only one problem. You didn't check for worms, and the wood was wormy. And even though the integrity of the wood in general can handle the weight of a camel, but here it rotted. So therefore, the part of the Mishnah you wanted to use to answer our question is no longer a valid answer to our question, and therefore, back to square one. What do we say about a cover that is strong enough to hold a shore, but not strong enough to hold a camel? And let's try approach number 2, 8 lines down. Toshma lochiso karoi, that if you don't cover it properly, there our Mishnah gave us an explicit case that if you don't do a good job of covering it, you're chayiv. So let's go through all the details again. That's why this is fast, because it's very repetitive. Hey chidami, ilema lo karoi l'shvarim lo karoi l'gemalim. If you put in a trash cover, it can't hold anything, pshita that you're going to be chayiv. That's obvious. It must be it must be that it was strong enough to hold a shvarim. It can hold 1,000 pounds, but it can't hold 1,500 pounds. So then, if there are camels, you're a fool. You did a terrible job, and you're poshev. And if there are no camels around, then you're an anus, and you should be putter. So how does our Mishnah say chayiv? Elolav, it must be the asin lefrakim, that there are camels, but only periodically. And there were in fact camels today, and they weakened the cover. What do we see in our Mishnah? So maybe we have our answer. That really you're chayev in a case where the cover is only strong enough to hold shvarim, but not to hold gemalim. Says the Gemara, lo, really that's not correct. Really, la'olam karoi l'shvarim v'lo karoi l'gemalim. Really, it was strong enough to hold shvarim but not gemalim, and u'shchichi gemalim. And really, there are camels there. So I don't understand. Says the Gemara, you should be chayiv. No, that's not correct. I did the nasi resha kiso karoi, nasi sepanami lo kiso karoi. Sometimes, in an effort to make Mishnayos poetic and make them nice and balanced, they've left open room for incorrect inferences. And our Seifa does not have the words of lo kisohu karoi in order to infer from. It's only there for symmetry, therefore no room to infer. Says the Gemara, Ika de Amre, some say that our question is ridiculous. We asked a question about whether or not the cover was good enough for shvarim, but not for good enough for shvar, but not for gemalim. Says the Gemara, third of the way down. Ika de Amre, Hanami vadai lo iboyalan. Even that couldn't be the question. The cave unto us in Lefrakim. Once we know that camels are somewhat frequent, you're a poshehu di boyla suki adaite. That can't be our question. If you know that there are camels out there, you have to plan for the reasonable possibility that there are camels, heavier animals. You got to, if there's like a hippo encampment right now, what are you going to do? You can't put something that can only hold 1,000 pounds. These animals weigh 5,000 pounds. Get on your game. That can't be what the Gemara's question was. We're going to discuss that in the Gemara. Very good text. Ki bailan. Our question is the following. Ki bailan hachi hu di bailan. Ki so kisu ishiyacholamo bifnei shvarim venu yacholamo bifnei gmalim. V'shchichi gmalim. Our question is what text was asking was all about worms. Mianrina migu dahave poshea etzel gmalim have poshea nami le'inyan tilia. Do we assume that if he's irresponsible in regards to camels, we also assume he's a slacker and not going to check on the quality of the wood? Odilma lo amrina migu. Do we connect the two irresponsibilities? Do we assume that if someone is irresponsible in area 1, that they're also irresponsible in area 2? Yes or no? Toshma, let's see if we can find some answers. Again, super repetitive, same things over and over again. Toshma. Kiso korei v'nafal asocho shoro chamor meisu pater. That's our Mishnah. Vitmar Allah Amar Reb Yitzchak Bar Bar Chana Shid Liyamitochad that it was rotted. Hey chidami ilema korei l'shvar mecharei l'gmal v'yislemitochad pshita de pater. If you did everything right, then how can you possibly be chayiv? You did everything right. My havalei lemevad elolav. It must be korei l'shvar v'lo korei l'gmal v'shchichi gmalim. There really were camels there, but v'hitliyam mitocho. But no camels went on that cover that you put on. The Ketani Pater. Alma lo amrin and migu davi poshele atla. We don't assume that just because you're a slacker in regards to the camels, that you're also a slacker. And there's some things that we're good at and some things that we're not good at. I'm very good at keeping my workspace clean. I'm not very good at keeping under my sink clean, just the way I am. You can't poison the well. There's sometimes things are you're good at, sometimes you're not. So here the Gemara says we can't connect them. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not true. 2/3 of the way down. Lo, maybe we should say really, it was a very strong cover. When you say, what should he have done? I'll tell you what he should have done. He should have gone and checked on the integrity of the cover every once in a while. Says the Gemara, go bang on it and see if the cover is still a good cover. They don't last forever. Wood degrades after a while. It says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, that there's no chiyuv to check. You don't have to worry about worms, which is a halachically very interesting comment anyways, because we actually check food for worms all the time. Why do we have to check food for worms, but not this for worms? Nezikin is still din in a Gemara. Okay, not for now. 3/4 of the way down, this answer no longer works because we've came up with another solution. So let's try another answer to answer our question. Toshma. This was a line that we just saw in our Mishnah, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, that if you did a horrible job of protecting the pit, you're going to be chayv. Hechidami, what was the case? If it was a terribly weak cover, you're a fool. Elolav, it must be that there was a cover. It was strong enough to hold up shvarim, but not strong enough to hold up gemalim. If in fact there were gemalim around, you're a fool. So what was the case? Maybe we should see from over here that we have an answer to our question. We should assume not nice things about you. Elolav, says the Gemara. Really, there were camels, but the wood was rotted. The katani chayv, and we see that you're still chayv. What does that show us? We do make a link between the fact that you're a slacker by the gemalim. You're also a slacker when it comes to the other case too, by the worms. You're just not responsible. Amri, says the Gemara, not necessarily true. That's not true. Really, it can hold the cows, it can't hold the camels, and there are camels. And really what happened was that the camels weakened the cover of the pit, and then shvarim came in and they died. Maybe we should say for sure he's a poshea because the camels were there. Says the Gemara, no, I did the nasib resha kiso karoi nasib nami seifa. Nami loki. So again, the language was not meant to be inferred from. You can't bring a raya from that case. Therefore, we don't have an answer to our question. Let's try answer number 3. 3 lines from the bottom. 4 more lines for the day. Toshma nafal letocho shor chereshot bekatan suma umahalech balayla chayev. That if an animal that was itself a chereshot bekatan or blind or walking at night, you will be held accountable. However, pikech umahalech bayom pater. If the animal was healthy and if it was walking during the day. So then the halacha is that you're going to be pater. We assume the animal should look before it steps. Why would you be pater by the pikech? Why don't we view them both as irresponsible? This migu is not said shma mina. Therefore, we can answer our second version of the question, which is to say that we don't assume that just because you as the balabas are a poshea in regards to the quality of the cover as it relates to camels, you're also a poshea in checking in regards to whether or not the wormy wood has ruined the cover. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night at the very bottom line on Beis Mid Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.